And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about John Taylor. Thank you for listening. Hello, I'm Richard.
Hello, I'm Cleo.
And welcome to our podcast, Thrift Shop Biography, where we go into thrift shops.
Or charity shops, or op shops.
Op shops.
Whatever they're known around the world. Yes.
Yes. And we go straight to the bookshelves and we look for memoirs and autobiographies.
And read them, and then talk about them. Anyway.
So what book did you find this week?
Nigel John Taylor's, otherwise known as John Taylor from Duran, the bassist.
Duran.
Which I'm very, very happy about because I'm an 80s girl and I love Duran.
You do, don't you?
I love them, yeah. And they're from Birmingham, where that's my neck of the woods. What about you?
My big sister was into culture clubs. I wasn't allowed to like Duran.
No. I like both. You can be allowed.
No, they were pitched against each other, weren't they?
Duran, Culture Club and Wham. They were the best ones.
Were you allowed to like all of them?
They were my favourite bands, those three.
I thought you had to pledge allegiance to a certain band.
No.
Really?
Well, but you're a bit darker as well, whereas I'm really happy pop. Anyway, Duran.
Oh, listen, but I do, in retrospect, I like looking back, Duran had some good tunes in the 1980s, didn't they?
Tunes. Literally every single hit they ever had. I absolutely love every single one.
Oh, even Wild Boys.
What do you mean even Wild Boys? Especially Wild Boys.
Really?
Absolute banger. Yeah. Absolutely love it. Are you joking?
No, I don't like it.
Right, anyway, here we go then. Let's launch into this and we can argue some more.
John Taylor. Not his real name.
Well, Nigel John Taylor.
Nigel.
I don't know why Nigel's funny, but it is. Even he says it was Nerdy Nigel. That's what he ended up getting called at school. It's just one of those names.
It is one of those names. I think he said something that Monty Python had a famous sketch in the 1970s or something, which really made fun of Nigel. Yeah, I wouldn't want to be called Nigel. No offence to any Nigels listening.
Well, I know. Sorry, Nigels. But hey, you can always use your middle name like John Taylor did, if you've got one.
Yeah, John Taylor's a very generic name, actually.
It is, actually.
And he actually says, doesn't he, that he changed it to John because John is a real classic punk pop name, like Johnny Rotten, Johnny Thunders, and John somebody else.
Bon Jovi.
John Bon Jovi, there you go. And he said now he wished he'd have been the only Nigel in pop.
Yeah, exactly.
But he just didn't have that confidence back then.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was born on 34 Simon Road, Hollywood, Birmingham, which is amazing, really, because he ends up working with Simon Le Bon and going to Hollywood a lot. It's weird, isn't it?
I think it's weird that there's just a tiny little enclave of Birmingham called Hollywood.
I know. How can you name it Hollywood? I've actually been there. I've got a friend who actually lives there.
You've hung out in Birmingham quite a lot in your youth.
Birmingham's really my home sort of area, yeah. My dad is Roger from Solihull. And we will later meet Roger from Solihull, who joined the band.
What, your dad was in Duran?
No, another Roger from Solihull, but who can believe there were two? Yeah, it's my neck of the woods.
You're a Brummie girl, yeah.
I really am, yeah.
But it's interesting because Birmingham, is way cooler than people allow it to be in history.
Yeah, not me. I know how cool it is.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of like the rest of the country kind of think it's almost a bit of a joke, maybe, like the poor cousin of Liverpool and Manchester.
It's totally that, yeah. And even we've said before, you kind of have to be near London to make it. And it's not true. This band broke the mould. There's so few famous bands from Birmingham, but there are some. But yeah, it's not known for it.
Did UB40 come from Birmingham?
Yes, I did, because the person who recorded the first demos of Duran in his flat in King's Heath in Birmingham was the person who gave birth to UB40, recorded them. Yeah, there's that link.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because they're all from Birmingham, yeah.
And there was something going on, because I remember in the Boy George book, before he became famous, he was living in a squat in London.
Yes.
And then he heard it was all happening in Birmingham. So he went up to Birmingham. I think Martin DeVille was up there, Sieg Sputnik bloke. So they were all
That's
hanging
right.
around.
There was a little scene.
Oh, and do you remember my mate Maggie, who we went to see? She's hung around in Birmingham. She was in the pop chart.
What was she in? Oh, that cool band.
She was in Swan's Way and Scarlet Fantastic. She was in two bands.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's the Brummie scene. So actually, like the cusp of the 80s, there was a lot going on in Birmingham, and it was very cool.
Yeah, it really was. I think she was called Patty Bell, or someone who was making costumes for Boy George, stage clothes. She knew Duran Duran as well.
Right.
And she was like the Vivienne Westwood in Birmingham. That was happening.
Yeah.
I love Brum. And I love how much John Taylor loves Brum.
Yeah, this whole book is set here, isn't it?
It's an ode to Birmingham. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Nigel, John Taylor, his mother was from Liverpool, because that's actually kind of a direct line across from Liverpool to Birmingham. And then his dad, Jack, was from Birmingham. And he was born in 1920. So, of course, when 1939 hit, he went to war. And all the stories of his war, what happened to him, it evolves over time. But it's pretty hardcore. Like, he was captured by the Nazis when he was in Cairo. And he was in a prisoner of war camp for 3 years. There was 12,000 of them in Stalag 344. And then he was in this legendary death march, which was 500 miles, where hundreds of these people died, prisoners of war. And he never spoke about it till really near the end of his life. And his brother, who was 5 years older, was there when the atomic bomb went off in Nagasaki. So they really had a hard war.
Yeah.
And it really shaped them. And he said that sort of hung over his whole childhood, this unspoken war history, and his parents just staying quiet about it. It's a real part of growing up, because he was born in 1960, Nigel John Taylor. Yeah, it's only 15 years after they all came back from the war.
Oh, it was just recent history, wasn't it?
So recent, yeah.
Yeah.
So he came back, and his dad was mates with the mum's brothers, because they all lived near each other, kind of Edgbaston way. And they just went on a date, and that was the love of his life. They stayed together right to the end. And, he was an only child, and he was loved unconditionally, absolutely adored. Yeah, he was a very loved boy.
Oh, I love it. When I read that sentence in these books, and it doesn't happen very often, but we had Richard Branson and now Nigel John Taylor. When they say, oh, I was an only child and my mum and dad loved each other and they loved me, I'm just like, oh, thank God.
I know.
Because we read such awful stories.
Why do they still end up messed up?
Oh, I know. I know.
There's no excuse for it now.
Yeah, I know.
Well, there is actually. It's fame. Fame itself is probably the worst thing that can ever happen to anyone.
Defo.
Yeah.
But until fame, do you know what? I was really surprised. So he's just like this only child with this loving mum and dad. He talks about church quite a lot at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, no.
It's surprising, isn't it? I mean, I don't know why it's surprising. Maybe, again, that's something to do with the era, with it being so soon after the war. I think people did go to church a lot more, but little Nigel John Taylor seemed to really like going.
Yeah, I know. Well, what happened was, because after the war there was a shortage of houses. There's a lot of bombing in Birmingham. And so there were all these new builds out in this estate in this place they named Hollywood that they just created. And so his dad got one of these new builds, but he had a car. He was a big car fan, and he could drive to work exporting car parts. He loved his life, he loved his job. But meanwhile, his mother was stuck out in the sticks with a kid and couldn't drive and had nowhere to go. So church became, like, she went 5 times a week and dragged little Nigel John along. And so it became her whole social life. So it's not necessarily like she was a religious freak. She just didn't have anywhere else to go.
She wanted to get out of the house.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a social life as well. But his foundation of the love of music comes from choirs and church and hymns.
Yes, hymns.
Who'd say the foundation of Duran Duran is hymns?
Hymns. And then he also recognises that all the hymn melodies and stuff have been appropriated from music by Bach and stuff.
Yeah.
And he actually says he would be stood in the church as a little boy listening to the organ and the hymns, and the hairs would be standing up on the back of his neck.
Amazing.
What a little weirdo.
Yeah, I know. But it's also the foundation of popular music in the same way as gospel music is the foundation of Motown and all that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, they're just songs.
I mean, it arguably was popular music for 200 years until Frank Sinatra came along.
Yeah. So, and then they had a radio. He said they were a radio family way above a TV. They had a radio, and then they had pop and the Beatles. Mum was a big Beatles fan, so he grew up listening to that stuff.
Yeah.
And what really hit him was Roxy music. He said Roxy music was my moon landing, because the lip gloss. He said, like, seeing gloves on a keyboard player. These are the things
I
that blew
watched
his
that
mind.
when he said that, because he does talk about Bowie in this book, but then everyone of this era, like literally, you will not read an autobiography by somebody who was a musician in the 80s who doesn't reference Bowie as an influence.
Yes.
So I'm pleased that he mentioned Bowie, but he goes big on Roxy Music.
True.
What I didn't realise was how early Roxy Music came about. This is 1972. Nigel John Taylor is watching Top of the Pops and Roxy Music come on. So I went onto YouTube and I watched that performance. Goodness, if you watch that in 1972, it seems so early in the 1970s. And here's Roxy Music being a synth band, and it's very cool. And like he says, it was his moon landing. I imagine, because media isn't all encompassing like it is now, that probably was a real shock to see a band like Roxy Music, something completely different.
He ended up bonding so much with Nile Rodgers, who works really closely to this day, I think, with Duran, because Nile Rodgers was completely influenced by Roxy Music as well.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah, he went to see them in England once and went, oh my God, this is what we need to be doing, and formed Chic. So they were bound to come together. They got the same feelings about things.
Yeah, wow.
Musically.
I nearly knocked Brian Ferry out once.
What? How?
Because when I was working backstage at the concerts and stuff, there was a festival and Brian Ferry was playing, and it was the end of the night and I wanted to go home, and I drank a can of Red Bull and thought, right, if I blitz these dressing rooms, I can go home quicker. And I thought that Brian Ferry had vacated his dressing room. Like I was just running around at the speed of light, and I ran into his dressing room and I opened the door and he was behind it, and it hit him right on the forehead.
Oh my God.
And he was so kind. He was so nice about it.
Oh, that's nice.
I thought I was about to get fired.
Wow.
But
he's a nice man.
He's a very nice man, and he influenced little Nigel John Taylor.
And you injured him.
And now he lives with a head injury.
Hey, this blew my mind. In 1973, when Nigel John was only 13, he met future Nick Rhodes, who was only 11.
Yes.
11, because I've always wondered how they met. And I never, ever pictured them as children.
I know.
Actual children.
He's a child. Nick Rhodes is a little child.
Yeah, he was called Nick Bates.
Master Bates.
Yeah, he was. He actually was. He was too young to be a mister.
No wonder he changed his name.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, Mr. Rhodes is better.
It's better, safer. But his mother owned a toy shop, which John Taylor said was the dream, and they ended up rehearsing above a toy shop. And they were queuing at the Odeon in Birmingham to get into gigs, and sometimes failing overnight when they were that age. Like trying to see Rod Stewart and Bowie.
Do you know what? I love this culture that this book talks about actually having to get up and queue for a ticket for a gig. None of this sitting online in a queue. You got up, you queued up.
Yeah, you're in the line, not online.
Yeah. And I love that they're buying their tickets for £1.35.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to be a dedicated music fan. That's the people going to the gigs then are in it for the music, because they've queued up for 12 hours in the hope, just because you're in the queue as well. If you're at the back of the queue, you might not get a ticket if they sold out.
No. And the great thing is you meet your peoples. You actually meet friends.
And I think now when you go to concerts and stuff, because people have bought their tickets online, I think some people aren't even bothered about being there half the time. It's changed. I'm an old man. Gig going has changed. It just has. And the invention of the camera phone has ruined gigs as well.
Ruined it, it has actually. Yeah.
But these two kids, so little Nigel John Taylor and Master Nick Bates, they're little musos, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are.
And the first gig they actually get to see is Mick Ronson, who was Bowie's right-hand man, but he was doing his first solo gig, and they went and... yeah, it blew their minds. So they're not just into mainstream, they're into proper music and bands and stuff.
And what I absolutely love, even at that age, is what they were wearing.
Yes.
They were wearing chiffon. Chiffon. They did up their hair, they wore makeup. They're basically glam rock. But he said they'd go to charity shops or vintage shops and find two-piece ladies' suits from the 40s and 50s. And then he goes, we just throw on a leopard print scarf and boom. There's an outfit, and they'd be wearing platforms and off out they go. at those young ages. That's absolutely superb. Bit of lip gloss, you're done.
Yeah, I love
It's
that.
fantastic. They're children. I love it too. And he was buying clothes from the same place I was buying clothes from when I was a teenager, going up to Birmingham.
And you were probably buying the same clothes, let's be honest. Bit of leopard print,
Oh, yeah.
bit of chiffon. That's you all over, isn't it?
I did get, because he mentions Oasis in Birmingham, that's where I bought my first platform shoes. Weird, isn't it? and he was going to Virgin Records in 1975 when it was like what we've read in Richard Branson's book.
Oh,
yeah, when you
yes.
just went to hang out and everyone's smoking.
Bohemian.
And just listening to records and
just
sitting
sit
on cushions.
on the floor.
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it?
And he said, this is a good pop culture fact. When Virgin Records opened their new glitzy store, John Taylor was the first person to buy an album there.
Amazing. That's a pop fact.
And then, because he was the first person, they also gave him a free copy of a Mike Oldfield album.
Which he didn't even open, he said.
Yeah, guess they had surplus stock at that point, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I love these crossovers.
But it's amazing. We know all about Mike Oldfield and Virgin now after reading the Richard Branson book.
We do. Yeah.
Everything is connected.
It's all connected. So he got given his first guitar in 1973 when he was only 13, and it went in the cupboard.
Well, it was an acoustic, wasn't it?
Yeah, but he couldn't be bothered with it, put it in a cupboard. 3 years later, when he's 16, the Sex Pistols comes out, and he's like, oh, this is amazing. And they're all making all this noise, but they're not really virtuoso players. So then he got his guitar out. And he went, oh, I'm having to go at that then. See, they inspired a lot of people by saying you don't have to be that good, just have a go.
Yeah,
that was
I
really,
think before
really
that,
good.
before punk happened, you kind of the impression that you did have to be really good on your instrument, or it was bands like Genesis and The Who and Queen who were really accomplished musicians.
Amazing, exactly.
Yeah, and then punk happened, and it was more about the attitude and the fun.
Just give it a
and,
go.
Yeah,
Just make some noise. It freed people up.
it really did.
So off he goes.
Yeah, so he's got an electric guitar now, and off he goes.
He's gone.
And you know, he goes to school's kind of like neither here nor there in this book. He just goes, and then as he gets older, he starts bunking off a bit, and he's
bunks
meeting
off
friends. So
loads.
when he's a teenager, he starts getting together with friends and starting bands. So from the age of 14, 15, he's starting to just prat about in little punk bands and stuff. And then he has one with his mates David, Gareth and Roy, and they called themselves Shock Treatment.
And they actually started writing their own songs, which is really key, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And they played the school summer dance, which is ironic because he really wasn't going to school. He got into forging his parents' signature. He hardly turned up. He only basically turned up to play the summer dance. They probably thought, who's this?
I thought this really showed how this young man, Nigel John Taylor, was going to get on in the music industry, and the fact that they had a band, as I imagine 100 teenagers all over Birmingham did. But actually they got together, they were writing songs and they were rehearsing, and Nigel John went out and got them a gig at school. And it's just at their school and stuff, but he's thinking ahead, we need to do live shows and stuff. You know, he's
really
thinking about moving forward.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
And eventually he goes to Birmingham Polytechnic College of Art and Design, and the only reason he did it is because his heroes like John Lennon, Keith Richards, Brian Ferry all went to art school. So he thought, right, well, I'll go to art school, then I can become them.
Yeah.
Oh my God, when I was reading this, I was talking to my friend James, who was there in Birmingham at this exact time when they were coming up.
Wow.
And was at all of the gigs they played. We're coming up to that, but Rum Runners and stuff. He was there. And he was like, yeah, they were just so cool.
Clubs.
Yeah. I was at all those gigs. He was at Barbarella's. He was in this book. And then, I'll come to that later. But I've got another friend who was at another gig. I've got, and I was there, but not when they were there. I'll shut up.
So,
carry on.
So
I'm overexcited.
Nigel John's first band, Shock Treatment, they do their first gig, and he actually goes, I love this. He says, we were absolutely awful. I couldn't wait to do it again.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is like a first band thing. And then quite soon they get taken on by this other band called Dada, who looked like a very avant-garde post-prog rock band. And they do that for a bit. And then, interestingly, when he's at Birmingham College of Art and Design, he meets another young man with musical aspirations called Stephen Duffy.
Yes.
Now, I knew that Stephen Duffy was in like the first incarnation of Duran Duran, But it's interesting to read how it all comes about. So, Stephen Duffy turned into Stephen Tintin Duffy, who did that song,
exactly.
Kiss Me in
I
the
love
80s
that song.
and Icing on the Cake. Yeah, so basically quite soon, Nigel John Taylor and Nick Bates leave the avant-garde band Dada because they've met Stephen Duffy, and then they get together. And they basically, this is the nucleus of actual Duran Duran now, isn't it?
Yes.
Named after...
Yeah, Duran, who is the scientist that Barbarella is searching for in the film Barbarella. But they didn't have Google search at the time, so they heard Duran Duran. They didn't know how it's spelled.
Yeah, they didn't know it had a D on the end.
No.
I love that.
And then they were also playing at Barbarella's, which was the name of a club in Birmingham at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And way later, like more like 90s, there's a song they did called Electric Barbarella.
Oh,
Do you know it?
Yeah.
It's a really great song of theirs. I don't know if it was ever a hit. Anyway, they are now formed.
So they're at Barbarella's, and they're hanging out, and they're older teenagers now, and they're seeing bands like The Clash, Generation X, which is Billy Idol, who we read recently.
Yes.
And then they saw Blondie's first gig.
Yeah.
And they said they saw Susie and the Banshees when they were playing to like 50 people, and then saw them grow and become a massive band. And even bands like the Human League.
Yeah.
Like before they were famous. So lot of stuff is going on in Birmingham.
Absolutely. They said the Human League were a turning point because it was so synth-based. They were like looking at it going, there's no guitars. and that really was a turning point. It's seeing the Human League that made Nick go out and buy a synth while his mum bought him a synth.
For £200.
Yeah, 200 quid for a synth would be a fortune in 1977.
The first synthesizer to arrive in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And he says it's the best investment Nick Rhodesmum ever made. I imagine it is 200 quid.
Hey, I've got a really good story. Do you want to hear it now?
Yeah.
All right, well, get this. Early 80s, I can't tell you exactly when, but it's like absolute total height of Duran Duran being insanely famous and crazy to me because I was like buying smash hits and got stickers of them, posters of them. My next door neighbour was in the war with John Taylor's dad, and he told my dad, I was listening, he said, I was just down Great William Street in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is only about 20 miles from Birmingham, where I grew up. He goes, yeah, I just saw that this bloke I was in the war with, and he was getting out of a Rolls Royce. And I said to him, bloody hell, you've done all right. Because they hadn't seen each other since the war. He said, what happened to you? I suppose you've got a nice villa in Spain as well, have you? He said, actually, I have. He went, what happened to you? He said, well, my son's John Taylor from Duran Duran.
Wow.
So, yeah, isn't that cool? And the thing is, he does say his dad absolutely loved cars.
Yeah.
And he never says he bought his dad a Rolls Royce or a house in Spain. So there's a lot of lovely things that he did for his parents that he hasn't even talked about.
Yeah, that's good to know.
That's how I know that. Can you imagine my tiny child brain comprehending that my next door neighbour knew John Taylor's dad? It blew my mind. I couldn't believe it.
John Taylor does talk about his dad in that, he'd come back from the war and they never really talked that much. But like in John Taylor's bedroom, as I think a lot of people did in the 1960s, there was pictures of Jesus and Mary on their bedroom walls. And he said his dad had this calendar which had pictures from all over the world, landmarks and stuff. And John Taylor's dad took it apart and he pasted them around little John Taylor's bedroom.
Yes.
Telling him there's a big world out there. Don't get stuck in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I find it so weird that it's called Hollywood.
I know.
And presumably when they used to start in post-war Birmingham, when they built those new build houses, Hollywood was a massive world-renowned thing at that point. It only meant one thing. Who built a little estate of houses outside of Birmingham? So, let's call it Hollywood. I can't do the accent. Let's call it Hollywood. So these bands are gestating and they're bringing on new people, and Stephen Duffy then leaves Duran Duran to go and start this other band, but he doesn't tell them, so they draft in other people. So Duran Duran is evolving with lots of mates and local musicians.
Yes. And the core of it is John and Nick Rhodes.
Yes, it is.
That remains the core. And then they find Roger Taylor, the drummer, Roger from Solihull.
Roger.
And at this time, another musical influence is when they hear Chic and they hear everybody dance.
Yeah.
So they almost come up together. They're not far behind Chic because that was their first single. And I get this because it blew John Taylor's mind as the bass guitarist because they really lead with bass. Sheep, don't they?
Yeah.
Everybody dance. You can hear the bass. You can hear it for any shit. And he's like, oh my God, the bass is so leading. And he just imitated that.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes into every Duran Duran because the bass is absolutely amazing in Duran Duran songs.
And of course, they're hanging out in clubs like Barbarella's and stuff with the massive speaker. So the bass is actually more apparent than it would be if you were listening on the radio. You know, you feel the bass. It makes more of an impact. So yeah, I totally get that.
Well, this is when they record some demos in King's Heath with the bloke who actually recorded UB40 and made them big. And, you know, one of them's girls on film. So they really went in early with some bangers.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And then they took the demo tape actually into a couple of record companies and nobody was interested. So, but that's okay. That's just like their literal first attempt. Yeah, and then so they're on the scene, they're on the Birmingham club scene, and they kind of end up at this place called the Rum Runner, which you know about.
I do. It's on Broad Street. It's not there anymore. But they said they were really looking for somewhere that they could have a residency. So they found this club, and it wasn't really that popular with young people. It was more an old people's club, and it had jazz playing a lot and stuff. But they went in there, and these two blokes that run it, they were brothers, the Barrow brothers, Paul and Michael. My friend who was there all the time said they really were like gangsters.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they thought they were it.
Well, their dad owned a lot of clubs, didn't he? And then he kind of he gave the boys the Rum Runner to do with whatever they wanted.
Yeah.
One of them had been to New York to Studio 54. And so the idea with the Rum Runner was to come back and recreate that in Birmingham.
Yeah. And it was a real meeting of the right people at the right time because Duran Duran, as it was looking for a residency and they were looking to manage a band and they had a spare bar within their club that they weren't really using. So they just said, look, move all your gear in there. You can rehearse in the day and you can have a residency and build up a scene, which they did. I mean, they absolutely got that place going and it's legendary to this day because of Duran Duran playing there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, it's amazing. And they said it was also a real musical education to them because the DJ was playing European dance music, funk, disco, jazz, contemporary music, and they were hearing so much music there when they weren't playing. And also it's funny because they all had jobs, like John and Roger were on the door, or like I think Andy was in the kitchens. Nick got the best job because he was DJing. You know, they were all actually working there and playing.
So it's actually a really good deal that band, that young band, get the rehearsal space and get to hang out in the nightclub.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But they pay it off by doing a few jobs around the place.
Yeah.
So so at this point they've brought on Andy Taylor. So there's now 3 Taylors in Duran Duran.
And none of them are related.
None of them are related.
Everyone thinks they're related. Why would there be 3 Taylors and none of them are related? It's weird.
And Andy Taylor's a little bit older and he'd already been a working musician, and so that I think that's good to have that older person in the band. And then they're still looking for a singer, and then one of John Taylor's housemates said, oh, I know this guy who might be suitable. He's an actor.
He was studying drama, wasn't he? He was a student at Birmingham University.
And that young man was Simon Le Bon.
Woohoo!
Yeah, so this is it. This is Duran Duran.
It's the final piece of the puzzle, isn't it? They said he brought the poetry because he had this book of lyrics and poems he'd written. And they were like, yes, that's what we need.
Yeah.
Some people mock their lyrics, but I love them.
Do you really?
Hungry like the wolf. I still say it now if I'm hungry.
Hungry like the wolf.
Yeah.
I say I'm Hank Marvin.
Do you? Stop it. Yeah, that's because you're a Cockney. No, you're not.
What?
Doesn't make sense. You're not Cockney.
Anyway, Simon Le Bon.
Yeah, he just made it
Yes.
because we must mention, actually, well, he's gorgeous.
Who?
I always want to say he's the white Elvis, Simon Le Bon, but not forgetting Elvis was white. It's really confusing.
Shut up.
What?
No,
Simon Le Bon?
stop it.
He's not
Stop
gorgeous.
it.
He's gorgeous.
not.
What's wrong with you?
No, he's not. He looks like a potato.
That's an amazing looking man.
No, it really isn't. What?
Yes, he is. Look, it's not just me that thinks that. There was, people went crazy for this man.
He's no Morton Harkett, let's put it that way.
No, they're different, but he's gorgeous. Right. The thing is that all 5 of them were good-looking fellows at the time, and everyone had their favourite. Mine was always Nick Rhodes, because he had pink lipstick. I loved this bleached hair. You know, he wore the most makeup, and he wore cravats and pink suits, and I loved him. But they're a good-looking bunch.
No.
Simon Le Bon, John Taylor, Nick Rhodes, best looking.
John Taylor and Roger Taylor are like the only good-looking people in that band.
You reckon?
Yeah.
No, well, I mean, history will tell you otherwise. People went mad for these boys, especially Simon. So, yeah, it's contentious. But Simon Le Bon's the only one who wasn't a Brummie because he was from Pinner. Also home of Elton John.
Yes.
Elton John and Simon Le Bon, both from Pinner.
Elton John and Simon Le Bon.
And they ended up pin-ups.
Pin-ups.
Pin-ups from Pinner.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he dropped out of university to become a full-time member of Duran Duran, which is amazing. That's really confident, isn't it? That they were going somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. And also, John Taylor had to go and tell his mum and dad that he wasn't continuing with his education. They were really upset with him. But then his very strong, silent dad actually took him to one side and just said, okay, we're going to give you a year to do it.
Yeah, but you know, Boy George's parents did the same, gave him a year. Do you remember?
The year isn't very long.
It isn't very long.
But actually, within that year, Duran Duran then pledged to do headline shows at Hammersmith Odeon by 1982, Wembley by 1983, and Madison Square Garden by 1984. And I mean, that seems absurd.
It's absurd, but they achieved it, which is incredible.
So just giving up education to concentrate on your band, they just knew what was going to happen, and it did.
Yeah, it did.
With that ugly man at the front.
Yes, stop it.
They're a tight little band now, aren't they? Because they've spent all this time in the Runner and they're playing and gigging and they have this residency. So they're on their way.
Yes, and they're getting managed by these gangsters who run this club.
Yeah.
But what the thing with them is that they're adults. And so when they went to meet industry people had faith in them because of these blokes who were older and really together, you know, rather than just these young lads.
So these managers actually get Duran Duran a slot supporting Hazel O'Connor, amazing early 1980s iconic singer.
Yeah, which cost them 20 grand.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that was happening then, but that still happens to this day. You pay to go on a support slot.
That was a lot of money back then, right? 20 grand.
It's a lot of money, and Mike Barrow sold his flat to pay for that. So although they fell out later, those people really did deserve to get some payoff for their success because they really put everything on the line for that band.
Yeah, and getting this support slot definitely got Duran Duran going.
It did it, yeah.
Yeah.
It did.
Because then, of course...
Yeah, and that basically got them signed.
Yeah, so then when they go to meetings with record companies, you know, they've done a nationwide tour with Hazel O'Connor. And they get an international record deal with EMI.
Amazing.
I mean, that's amazing. And like you say, that's very good management.
It's very good management. But you know what? They were a damn good band.
Yeah, they were.
And Planet Earth was their first single.
Do you know what? I think Planet Earth could be their best song, actually. I love it.
It's a great song.
I have it on my playlist now. I listen to it almost every
Do
day.
you?
Yeah, I really like it.
Oh, wow. It says, some people say that it could be the first truly 80s song.
Okay.
That's up for debate, but you know, why not?
Well, I kind of think Fade to Grey by Visage. Oh, I wonder which one came out first.
Oh, good point.
They're basically the same year, I would guess, off the top of my head.
Yeah. And it's got the words new romantic in it.
Oh, yeah.
Some new romantic looking for a TV sound. I think that's the first time the word new romantic was said, and that then really named that whole movement. I have a suspicion.
Radio responded really well to Planet Earth. Radio 1 started playing it all the time.
Yeah.
The first week it got into the charts, it got to number 97. And they filmed a TV show called Look Here for the BBC. And I watched it on YouTube last night, and they actually play 3 songs. This is the first time Duran Duran ever appeared on TV. They played Planet Earth, Careless Memories, and Girls on Film.
Brilliant.
Yeah, they're really, really good.
Of course they are.
Yeah, you can see how that they're going places from that first performance.
Yeah.
But also, interestingly, they're taking off in Australia.
Yeah,
so the other side of the world, Planet Earth gets to number 1.
Number 1 in Australia.
In the UK, it goes top 10. But also they filmed, you know, this is the age of the pop video.
MTV.
Yeah, so they film a video for Planet Earth, and, you know, they look good, apart from Simon Le Bon.
Stop it. I can't believe it.
So they're kind of quite quickly getting out there.
Yeah, it's true. That video cost 10 grand. That's a lot, isn't it? So, yeah, they really got on board with the video era, which was the secret of the success of this time, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Right, this is what happened. He says that they sat in this room in the Rum Runner and hand replied to all their fan mail. My mate Michaela, right, has got one of these letters from John Taylor. She showed it me.
No
and
kidding.
It actually says, "Dear Michaela," and he didn't just do a quick reply. It actually is this whole thing. It says, "Thank you so much for your letter and your support. We really appreciate blah, blah, blah." Regarding the coming up gigs, as you're from that area, we will be coming to Brighton Dome to play, and it says the date. You know, be really happy to see you there, right? Love, John Taylor. Right, this whole letter.
Wow.
Yeah, like got the address, everything, right? So she went to that gig, and they say that gig at the Brighton Dome was the first time they realised things were going nuts. She was actually there, but she's described it to me, which he doesn't do in this book, where she goes, like all the lights go down and then Simon Le Bon comes from behind, he's backlit and he's got this trench coat and the collar's turned up and this hat and it's like really film noir. And then they've got this instrumental song playing and they build it up and then the band come on. So they really, it's really theatrical. That's something that I didn't get from this book. To have this described to me, what it's actually like, that gig makes more sense of why everyone went mad, because sounds really different. Like they'd really put an act together.
Right.
So you couldn't even Google that. You'd have to have been there. So it's really great to hear that from the horse's mouth.
I'm amazed that you know somebody that was there, because that
Me too.
Is the beginning of this book. The first chapter is like...
Is that gig.
Wow.
That was a pivotal gig for them.
Yeah, because they said they kind of, had been building and then they're backstage at this gig and all of a sudden they get on stage and they can't even hear themselves play.
Yes, I know.
I think he says something like every teenage girl in Brighton was having an epiphany at the same time.
Yeah. But what he doesn't say is what they created to make that happen.
Yeah, right.
Something so exciting, so different, and so theatrical. That's really cool, isn't it?
God, and your mate Michaela was there.
Yeah, she was there.
Wow, that's like pop history.
And that's amazing. I've got to get a copy of her letter and I'll put it on the Facebook page.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Nice. So, Duran Duran are off. They've got hordes of teenage screaming fans. It's Duran mania, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. You know why? Because they're all so good looking, as well as the music's good.
Well, no, that does play a big part in it, I suppose.
It does, because there were basically 5 pin-ups. When One Direction came out, I thought this era's Duran Duran, because they're good pop tunes, One Direction, and every single one of those boys, similar age. That was Duran Duran of now. You have to explain to young people that Duran Duran was One Direction.
What's very interesting about your observation is Planet Earth was a top 10 hit, and then they wanted to release Girls on Film next, but the record company said, no, release Careless Memories, because it's more of a serious pop tune and people would take you as serious musicians. Actually, that did not chart as well. I think it got to number 30 something, and people were saying, oh wow, a Duran Duran, already a one-hit wonder. And then they were working with this woman who said, get yourself in Jackie magazine, because you're all really good looking. So they got their posters up in Jackie magazine, which, if you don't know, was probably the most popular teenage girl magazine in Britain in the 1980s, which really then took them to another level. The next single is Girls on Film. I think that gets to number 4 or something. So yeah, they had this little blip at the beginning where they didn't chart, and then they said, hey everyone, we're really good looking.
I know, and they ended up becoming a teen idol band, which so did Culture Club, which made them laugh as well, because they were never ever aiming for kids. It was just an adult band, but the market is there. So what are you going to do? Just happens. And I love this for John Taylor, because he always wore really thick glasses when he was Nigel John Taylor. Yeah.
And he says he was a complete nerd.
Yeah.
But all of us, now this is kind of a running theme through this book now. Like, the girls never looked at him. And now all of a sudden he can have any girl that he wants.
Yeah, but it gives you a hollow feeling, because you think, but they don't really like me. They like the famous me.
Yeah.
So then your troubles actually start, and your soul starts disintegrating. That seems to be what happens.
Do you know what? When they go on tour and stuff, so they're building now and they get a tour in the United States. He said the first place they played was called Hicksville.
Yeah.
I love that. So they're doing their first US tour. He says, obviously it's amazing as a young man going round playing these gigs. But when he went back to his hotel room, he just had this profound loneliness and he just couldn't deal with it. And so he started plugging those gaps with cocaine.
Yeah, coke was already knocking around even in Rum Runner times.
Mm-hmm.
But he said that it was absolutely normal. It was as normal as having a pint. Nobody ever thought anything of it. So it just escalated. But he says he was on self-destruct, right? Sleeping with everybody, drugs, no sleep, bad food, all of that. But he couldn't understand why. But after years of therapy, he got to the bottom of it. He just missed home and missed his mum and dad.
Yeah.
Oh, he's just a loved little boy that missed his mum and dad.
Yeah, because I kind of was thinking, why does he find loneliness so hard when he was an only child? And I kind of thought, you're used to being on your own if you're an only child. Actually, no. His mum and dad were very much a unit with him. And he said even up to the age of 10, he would sleep in their bed.
I know. And you see the pictures in the book and he's always wedged between them. Like he's so protected and loved.
Yeah.
He just couldn't handle it. He's a bit young to handle it.
It's just homesickness, isn't it?
I know, it's homesickness. Yeah.
Homesickness happens to good-looking pop stars too.
It does. And because it's unidentified, you don't know how to handle it. And it's that classic thing of fame as well, where you become rats in a gilded cage, he says, and you can't go out because there's screaming people everywhere you go. Oh, it's really nice as well because the fans start descending on his parents' house in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And he said his mum and dad just used to go out and spend time with them and chat to them.
Yeah.
Apart from later on when it got a bit much and he had a bit of a breakdown because he suddenly felt like his mum and dad were fans.
Yeah.
Because they were all excited about the fan mail and he had a bit of a breakdown. But generally...
I imagine it's a really hard thing for like a 22-year-old pop star to admit when you're on tour and your bandmates do have girlfriends and you're on your own. I bet it's really hard to say to somebody, I miss my mum and dad.
You can't. But even say to yourself.
Yeah.
You're saying to yourself, I've got everything I ever dreamed of. But actually...
And it wouldn't be cool. It wouldn't be cool to say you miss your mum and dad. They say, oh, you're a mummy's boy.
It's not cool.
So I imagine, that's really hard, poor Nigel.
I know.
Anyway, so the first album did really well. They're touring America, and then they make the classic 1980s album called Rio.
Rio, yes, the Reflex. Yeah. Tunes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Nile Rodgers comes in and remixes the Reflex.
Yes.
Because it was just an ordinary song, and he's the one who goes flip, 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 flex. So he's the one who completely mixed it up like that, and made it unbelievably legendary.
That was a massive transatlantic number one smash, wasn't it?
Humongous. I mean, they're massive in Australia. Still, they're touring Australia. He lives in Sydney for a while.
That's amazing. You know what? I just don't think that bands really tour to Australia anymore because it's just not financially viable. But in the 80s, it sounds like bands really did.
True. I don't know if they do now or not.
No, they just don't go anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, poor Australia. They're just too far away.
Yeah, they got their own bands, though. The Chisel, what's it?
Yeah, like we learned in Michael Hutchence. They've got loads of really good bands that we don't get to hear because they don't come this far the other way.
Cold Chisel.
Yeah. Cold Chisel, yeah.
Yeah, third album, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, another legendary album.
But this is where they got kind of a bit of an ink, because everything was going number one up until that point, the singles and the albums. And then Union of the Snake was the lead single to Seven and the Ragged Tiger. And they were in Australia at this moment, weren't they? With Champagne on Ice waiting to toast. They were assuming that was going to number one. It didn't. It went to number 3. They said it was really anticlimactic.
Yeah, no, gutted.
Yeah.
Choked on the champagne. Number 3, most people would be very happy about that.
I'd be very happy with a number 3 single.
I would. Oh, actually, yeah, it was when they were in Australia and they heard the pre-release of INXS's Original Sin.
Yes.
John Taylor was like, who mixed this? This is the sound I want. And he found out it was Nile Rodgers, and that's what brought Nile Rodgers into the band to do the Reflex. That's how that happened. So It's Australia related. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they were insanely popular at this point.
Yeah, weren't they?
And they played Madison Square Gardens. They'd achieved their goals. Wild Boys happened in 1984. Nile Rodgers produced that as well.
Yeah.
They got to do the big budget videos. Yeah. They were on a massive high. Still, even if they weren't quite hitting the number one spot.
John Taylor was on a massive high with the assistance of various narcotics.
Yeah, he was off his face.
Yeah, I hate this.
Absolutely off his face.
This is like Billy Idol again. It's just...
I know, it's a real shame. I know, it is. And it's drugs that started to divide the band, because there were some of them that didn't do any drugs and the ones that did.
Yeah.
Nick Rose didn't touch them. And so he was like staying away from the people who might judge him within the band. Just getting paranoid.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean,
there's a night when they're all out and Roxy Music are in the nightclub. This is the same as Billy Idol, actually, when he finally met the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And John Taylor was like, wow, there's Roxy Music, my absolute idols who changed my life, my moon landing.
Yes.
And he's so off his face and so intent on finding his next line of coke. He says he's all over the place in the nightclub and he doesn't spend any time with Roxy Music.
Oh, no.
And then he says he blacks out and he comes to in Roger Taylor's hotel room, and Roger Taylor's got into a fight, so he's covered in blood, and Roger Taylor's girlfriend is nursing him. And then John Taylor sees this and gets so jealous that Roger has a girlfriend and John is just on his own and so incredibly lonely. John Taylor goes back to his hotel room and punches the wall and fucks his hand, and they have to cancel the tour.
Yeah.
So this is out of hand now.
Out of hand. Oh dear.
You know, it's going beyond
Yeah.
a bit of rock and roll indulgence. It's interfering with the
He's really,
tour.
really losing the plot.
Yeah.
Oh, another really cool thing that happens is they went to a party. Cubby Broccoli was there, who's the producer of Bond. And he said, we want to do a Bond tune. They literally, that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have physically met him and suggested it. Next thing he knows, he gets the call. And they work with John Barry and write A View to a Kill. They get Bernard Edwards on it because Nile Rodgers wasn't available, apparently. I mean, that's just brilliant, though. That's a great Bond tune.
This didn't occur to me until I read it in this book, but the video to A View to a Kill, where they're all playing those secret agents at the Eiffel Tower with Roger Moore.
And Grace Jones is in there. Yeah, so cool.
It didn't even occur to me that no two members of Duran Duran are on the screen at the same time because the relationships within the band had fractured so badly, they didn't want to be together.
Yeah.
And when you watch that video, they're just on their own.
I think they got them together for one shot, but they just didn't want to be standing next to each other. Oh no, it's really sad. But hey, it's not over. It's not over.
It's not over. Not to this day. But this is the time where Duran Duran does splinter, and Simon Le Bon and Nick Rhodes go off and do Arcadia. Oh, is Roger Taylor with them as well? I can't remember. But then John Taylor and Andy Taylor do the Power Station.
Yes. So it's Nick, Simon and Roger in Arcadia.
Okay, and then it's John Taylor and Andy Taylor in the Power Station with
Tony Thompson, the drummer of Chic.
And then they're out one night and they bump into Robert Palmer.
Yes.
I'm going to say something controversial here.
Yeah.
I think Some Like It Hot by the Power Station is better than any single Duran Duran record.
That's an interesting but erroneous comment you just made there.
I think it's an absolute thunderous classic 80s tune.
It is a good song, yes. But I'm not putting it up in competition with Duran Duran's hits.
They can exist.
Yeah, they can run alongside each other happily. Yeah, because it's Tony Thompson who plays with them at Live Aid, right? Because both Duran Duran and the Power Station played at Live Aid. Tony Thompson's drumming with them in the Power Station. But it's also him who is drumming with Led Zeppelin. Do you remember when they reunited for Live Aid and Phil Collins got all caught up with it? And they had two drummers and it was him and Tony Thompson drumming with each other. And Tony was really pissed off that Phil was there and he had a really hard time. So this is where it all ties together. Listen to Phil episode. It's quite funny, that whole incident.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And also, this is another book which mentions Live Aid with no mention of Australia.
Yet again, you're right.
It's been completely erased from Live Aid history.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're doing a solo effort to bring it into public consciousness.
Yeah, justice for Australian Live Aid. Yeah.
Yes. So he said after Live Aid, it was another 18 years until they all played together.
Wow. Do you know what? I love Robert Palmer, right? I think his voice is amazing and he's singing with the Power Station and they have that amazing album, a couple of massive tunes, and then his own solo career takes off because it didn't before.
Yeah, after that. Addicted to Love.
Yeah, I Didn't Mean to Turn You On. His solo albums went into the stratosphere.
Yeah.
He gave up the Power Station. I kind of thought he could have kept that going, actually.
Do you think?
But yeah, I think the Power Station
wasn't too busy.
No, I don't think you are too busy when you're at that level. Phil Collins is busy, but he still gets to play drums with Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, but people got sick of him.
Did they?
They did. Phil tells us that.
You didn't get sick of him.
I never did.
You're so loyal. So what? We're running out of time. What else happens to John Taylor?
A lot of stuff happened. I tell you what we're doing. We're we're not really mentioning his love life because who cares really? He goes out with one beautiful woman after another. If you Google him, you'll just see that he's beautiful, she's beautiful. Whoever she is, he's always with beautiful women.
Well, Amanda de Cadenet.
Including Amanda de Cadenet, who was 19. I didn't realise that. She was famous in Britain in the 90s for being a presenter. And they had one kid. And I'm really happy to say that's the only kid he ever had. Because then he eventually married Gila Nash, who I had no idea that anything that happened in his personal life. And it turns out that she had 2 kids already, which sort of became his kids. So he had one actual daughter, 2 adopted kids basically. And that's his whole family that he's ever had. And this Gila was the co-founder of Juicy Couture, which is very cool. There's quite a few of them, Simon Le Bon obviously married Yasmin Le Bon. The fashion and music went really side by side in the 80s, didn't it? Especially with them. They loved their fashion.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that happened to him, all of that stuff. But then they had a bit of resurgence with an album, The Big Thing, and it was I Don't Want Your Love. But then Ordinary World and Come Undone are the most beautiful songs. I bought that album, the wedding album.
This isn't all 5 of Duran Duran, is it? It's 3 of them, isn't it? It's Nick, Simon and John Taylor, isn't it, at this point?
You're right, but they ended up getting back together and touring, and I went about 5 years ago. I finally saw them.
Did you?
Yeah, finally.
Were they good?
It was fantastic for me because it was the first time I'd ever seen them. But I went with Michaela, who'd seen them at the Brighton Dome, and now I totally understand how kind of disappointing that must be to sit in your seated area, and not be going mad for this band. But they've still all got it. They're still all cool.
They have done some good tunes, actually. They like just in terms of songwriting, like Ordinary World and Skin Trade and stuff. I mean, they're really good songs.
Yeah. The Wedding Album's the first album I bought since the 80s.
Is it?
Because of those songs, Come Undone. I loved that. Yeah. Loved it.
So, just for the purposes of wrapping up this podcast, Duran Duran continue. John Taylor goes to rehab, doesn't he?
Yeah, and he sorts himself. He was just basically, he loved rehab. He just wanted out, and he didn't know how to stop, and they just taught him to stop, and so he stopped. And sobered up, and he's sober to this day.
You see, he has that good family background. I think I think it's probably just easier to do if you don't have a history of addiction and you have a really loving mum and dad.
The foundation was strong. He just literally didn't know how to stop, and then someone told him how, and he did it. And now he's in AA every day, and he's doing all right. Thank God.
And he was basically just doing it to plug the hole of loneliness.
Yes.
And then when he starts seeing a long line of beautiful women, he doesn't need the drugs.
No, but he still did, though. He still took drugs all the way through all those relationships. But, he just went to rehab once and he was cured. But anyway.
Oh, there's an interesting bit towards the end of the book where they're touring later as Duran Duran. And when the coach turns up to pick them up, the driver is Les McCowan, who was the lead singer of the Bay City Rollers.
Oh, yeah.
If people don't know, the Bay City Rollers in the UK in the 1970s, they were basically Duran Duran or One Direction. They were the biggest pop band, number ones for about 2 or 3 years. And then it all disappeared. And it was so interesting to hear that man is now a coach driver.
Yes.
And it just made John Taylor think, gosh, you know what, there, but for the grace of God go I.
Yeah, this must not happen to me.
It really shows the fickleness of the music industry, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it does.
Wow.
Do you know what? In lockdown, John Taylor was doing bass guitar lessons.
Was he really?
Yeah, and I was watching them quite a bit, and I thought, oh, what a nice man. He just seems like such a nice person. He really does come across well. Yeah.
Can you play bass now?
No.
So he's not a very good teacher.
No, I wasn't trying. I don't have a guitar.
Did you just sit and look at him?
Yeah, I just listened to him chat.
You sat watching a bass guitar lesson without a bass guitar. You just wanted to look at John Taylor. Wow.
Yes, that's right. No, just hanging out, Well, look, it's lockdown. There's nothing else to do. Anyway, nice boys.
Wild boys.
Yep.
Well, actually, they weren't all wild, actually. Nick Rhodes was very mild-mannered and had no addictions.
Yeah, he was, actually.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.